So people don't know. Alan doesn't even know this.
Oh,
About us, but this is Alan and I know this. About us. But this is Alan and I know each other. We've been together a few times. We've known each other for a long time. I actually did a virtual event with Alan the week he became a #1 New York Times bestseller. So
I've forgotten that
we had good luck. We had good luck together. So
well, from my luck to yours.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll sell some books.
We're going to manifest that happening.
I once in the world of meta, I just realized this in the middle. I didn't want to interrupt her again. I once actually had an Arnold Palmer with Arnold Palmer.
Oh wow!
So now I feel like we should use malaprops at malaprops. Like we should. Like they're misspoken.
Or if
phrases.
you want to have an Alan Gratz with Alan Gratz, it would be a cheese pizza at Mellow Mushroom.
There we go. All right, so let's get started.
All right, so welcome. We won't keep talking about food questions.
Oh,
so we're here to talk about City Spies.
Okay.
And your new book. So it just came out this week, right?
Came out Tuesday.
Book birthday. Happy birthday.
Today is Thursday. It came out 2 days ago.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Yes.
So for readers who might be new to your series,
yes,
tell us what the whole series, City Spies, is about.
City Spies is a British secret agent and on different missions around the world has come across different kids, five kids who fall into the cracks. And he can't turn his back on them. And so he adopts them and he turns them into a family of spies because that's what he knows. And through kind of happenstance, they become this secret kind of experimental team that MI6 uses on places where adults would stand out.
Right.
So sometimes you need to spice a place where kids can blend in. And for me, it seemed like a natural fit because middle school to me felt like being a spy. Like I was just trying to hide in the background and I was trying different identities and I was trying to spy on people and figure things out. And it just kind of led from that. So that's what the series is. Each series kind of has a signature city that they're going to. The reason it's called the City Spies is their code names are the cities they're from. So there's Paris and Brooklyn and Sydney and Rio and Kathmandu. And then each book has a big landmark on the cover. Like this one has the pyramid. First one had the Eiffel Tower, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Bird's Nest Stadium. So we go to big cities and Asheville is not a big city, but Alan Gratz is here. So when we're laying out a tour, I'm on tour for 2 weeks. And my publicist, and we're talking about places to go. And he's like, you should go to Asheville. I'm like, all that's in Nashville. Oh, yeah, Alan Gratz is in Nashville, and Malaprops is in Nashville. So that's why we're here today.
That's right, and we have a few other attractions. We'll talk about how you can do a book about the city at the end of the program. So tell us about this book, though. So now each of the books focuses on, uses one of the kids as a central character. Right. They're all in all the books.
They're all significant in all of them, but in each one takes the lead.
Right, and so you've had. So the books in the series so far, we've had Brooklyn started
the first one,
right, and Sydney in the second one.
Yep.
Paris in the third book. Right. These are all the kids and the cities they're from. Yeah. And this one's Kat.
Kat's the star.
So tell us about Kat and this story.
So Kat is the hardest character for me to write. In some ways, Kat's the most like me. Kat is, we never say it outright, but Kat is probably Asperger's. She's on the spectrum of things, and she sees the world through a lens of math. So she sees her great skill, her great wonder is that she sees patterns where other people see chaos, and that's super handy in code breaking.
Yeah.
And I built that character because this is true of members of my family. This kind of, and I wanted a character that they could identify with, they could feel. But Kat's way smarter than me. So I had to wait a couple books till I could write one where she was the driving force. And so in this one, the idea, the book begins with a heist at the British Museum because I love heists.
Yeah.
And our team is breaking into the museum to steal Egyptian artifacts, and they're wondering, why is the British government having us steal something from the British government? And that's kind of becomes, and we deal with the issues of, are some of the things that we have in museums, should they be in the countries where they belong?
Right.
But Kat is in the focus of all this. She's the alpha. So she's the one who's planning the mission. And they ended up having to not just deal with the artifacts at the museum, but they have to go to Egypt. And so we go to Egypt and we go to the Great Pyramids and we go to the Valley of the Kings.
Very cool.
But the crime is a cyber assault. So what I wanted to do was write about something really modern and something really old and how they overlap. Nice. Yeah.
So speaking of I'm going to pick up on the cyber thing for a second. Your first original City Spies book came out a week before the COVID pandemic. right? So
And
good time.
it's about a virus. And it's about a virus.
It's about a virus. It's about the kids trying to stop the release of a deadly virus. It's like you manifested the pandemic.
No, actually, I had a really good publicist then. And what we did is we released the virus to make it more topical, and it just got out of control.
So then my question is,
not what happened.
my question is, do you feel responsible in some way for the pandemic? And should we be worried about a cyber attack now?
You know, Jake Burt wrote a book about being isolated during a pandemic.
Yes, I read that book.
I read that book. Jake gets the blame.
Right.
I was out and done, and I am pre, and it's just something.
Okay, well, I'll take that for now.
I'm like Isaac Asimov predicting the future. Unfortunately, no.
Harry Seldon.
So totally accidental. Totally.
Are you in fact personally responsible for the Chinese spy balloon?
Because the last one was China, and
now the cyber attack, cyber spy.
I worry about them picking up clues, but no, I've not written about the balloons. The cyber attacks are actually based on the actual cyber attacks that have happened over the last few years. And what I found really fascinating about them is that they're way more than we know about.
Yeah.
Because the companies are not wanting to admit that they've paid hundreds of millions of dollars because they've been so. And what's really they're being run by they're like gangs that you can hire.
Well,
to do it,
one of the things what they do is, as I understand it, they recruit some people who are hackers, and they pay them to basically attack their system and find the faults in it.
Yes.
Right. So, and their job is to then report the bugs and the way they got in instead of taking it down.
Right.
But that's fascinating stuff.
It is.
And do we get into some of that with this?
We get into some, and actually we get into specifically that. We get into hackers who've been hired. You know, there was and I don't want to venture too far off.
I don't want you to get.
But there was this. There was a huge assault called the WannaCry assault, cyber assault a few years back, and it threatened to undo the internet.
Right.
It was out of control. It was something developed by the NSA, I believe. This North Korean government unleashed it, and it was stopped by a teenager from England with a domain name he bought for $20 on his parents' computer in their basement.
That's awesome.
And when I read that, I thought, this is what I'm writing.
This is what your
for everyone who says you're writing about, literally every global government had their top people. Every tech company had their top people trying to stop this thing. And I think he was 19, he might have been 20 years old. He goes and he had been on vacation. He came and goes, oh, look at that. And 2 hours later, it was over. And it's just like, and so there's a line in the book where it says, never underestimate what a British kid can do in his parents' basement with a computer, because that's exactly what my series is. And so that's why I thought, yes, I want the cyber attack to be it, because I want them to channel that youthful solution to grown-up problems.
Nice. All right, I'll let you off the hook for the balloon then, and maybe
we'll not me.
All right, we'll give you credit for shooting it down then. I also, just to jump in there, I have also had moments of really weird synchronicity. Yes. So the year, refugee.
Well, first of all, you wrote about book banning, and thank you.
I know, right?
So thanks for giving them that idea.
That's true. When I wrote ban this book, there were about maybe 800 to 1,000 books being banned in the U.S. every year, and now that number has quadrupled, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But when I wrote Refugee, we had all three of the stories in it had things that echoed right in that moment. The Canadian government apologized for turning MS St. Louis away that year.
Yep.
Fidel Castro died as I was writing the author's note, and it was all about, that story. That part of the story was all about Cuban refugees escaping Fidel Castro, and our relations with Cuba were changing. And then, of course, the Syrian civil war was going on, and things were changing all the time. And we had a new president who forbade Syrian refugees from coming to the United States. All of that was happening as I was writing that book. So I've had other instances too. I like to just think we're paying attention.
It's tricky to write current events, and I've written. They're based in England, or they're based in Scotland, but they're for the UK. And for 3 years, I've not mentioned the Queen, because I lived in fear that the second I write the Queen in there, she'll pass away. Because that's she's in her 90s.
It's your fault.
She did. Yeah. Well, no, I didn't.
I see.
So I did nothing about that.
If we're keeping score at home, he caused the pandemic. He's caused the Chinese balloon. And you killed the Queen of England.
Yeah.
So good job.
Luckily, they said they edit this. Okay.
So Now, getting back to the books themselves. Well, first of all, can you give us any hint about what new terror you're going to unleash on us?
Book 5?
Yeah.
I just finished it last week. The first, major part of it before the rewrites. It takes place in Venice, Italy, and goes to Washington, D.C. and New York City. The big endings are at the New York Public Library and the United Nations. And it is about a global environmentalist, teenage environmentalist. I think a lot of the best work being done in environmentalism. Greta Thunberg's one, but there's like a dozen of, and they're not just like, oh, they're rallying in their town. It's like they are affecting stuff.
Yeah.
And
so climate change also James Ponti.
No, I'm bringing the solutions.
Here we go. So what was your inspiration for the whole series?
The problem of doing this with someone that you're friends with. All right. Laurel Snyder was nicer because we know each other. We're friendly, but yeah. What was this?
So, real question. Tell us about the inspiration for the whole series. Where did it come from?
So I wrote a series called Framed, and Framed was set in Washington, D.C., and it was about kids who consulted for mysteries with the FBI. So kind of Sherlock Holmes as a teen in Washington, D.C. And I finished the second book on a Friday at 7 o'clock. And by 9 o'clock, I was at the airport, and we flew to London. And literally the next day, we're in front of Buckingham Palace, right? Because my son went to school, and my wife is a school teacher. She left for school that day. She goes, "Why are you still at the computer?" And it's like, "I haven't finished the book yet." She goes, "Well, I'm going to Europe tonight, whether you go or not." And when she came back from school, I was still in my pajamas, still at the computer, hadn't packed. But I'd finished the book. So it's time to start writing the next one. Right. So I'm there, and I'm in London. I'm thinking, wow, this is great. We went to the Sherlock Holmes Museum, and I thought, in book 3, I could have the characters come to London, and they could go to this Sherlock, and I had all these fans of Sherlock Holmes meet every year at New Year's Eve, and then one of them dies, and they're going to solve the mystery. So this is, the next 2 days, and then we went to Paris, and then with the Eiffel Tower, and my wife is in love with everything she sees. I go, wow, I want to, so they'll go to London and Paris. And then I realized I just sent the Brady Bunch to the Grand Canyon, right? I'm only on my 3rd book, and
that was a great episode.
They're already doing the traveling, and I thought, no, I need a new series, that goes to big city,
where the Brady Bunch goes to Hawaii.
Yeah, and I'll leave my kids in that series in Washington, and I literally went to a bookstore when I got home, like a week later, and I went into the kids department, and I stared at it, and I asked myself, what's missing? And I stared at these covers. And 20 minutes later, my wife came back from whatever she was at Macy's or whatever she was at. And she says, "So what'd you come up with?" I was trying. And I told her the plot. It was exactly the plot I just told you,
nice.
And so it was inspired by that trip and wanted to capture, it was I'd been to Europe a couple of times for work. It was my wife's first time. And her excitement at seeing the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay and the Eiffel Tower, that excitement belongs on the page. That's what's great. And actually what was amazing in the pandemic is we were reminded that books can take us places when we can't go.
Yeah.
And these books are built about taking you there. Yes, we want adventure. We want this family story. We want the spy stuff. But it's also about, man, isn't Cairo fascinating? Isn't Paris great? San Francisco,
One of my favorite things about spy films is the way that they often are globe-trotting stories,
absolutely.
Right? 1 minute you're on one continent, you're on another continent, and it kind of feels like whiplash sometimes in the films, but in a book you got a little bit more time to settle in, to see a place, to experience a place, but then you
get to describe it a little that you can in a movie,
right?
And talk about the stuff I found out when I did my research trip to the New York Public Library. It's like, if you were just running through it in a movie, you would never know. But in the book, we can throw in some little tidbits that are going to be really fun.
Right. Speaking of research, you do a lot for your books.
You do a ton.
I do.
We both do.
I do, but you do a lot as well. And you've talked a little bit about some of it. You've talked to a lot of interesting people along the way.
Yes.
What are some of the most interesting topics, conversations, people that you've talked to for the City Spies book?
So I try to track down. I want them to be smart. I know that people read and watch TV with the internet in their hand. Right. My favorite moment of this week is a mother texted a picture of her son reading the new book at a Tulane basketball game. Right. So he's reading at the basketball game. She goes, "I am the only mother in the world in an event whose son just said, 'Mom, look up half-eaten sandwich, Antwerp diamond heist.'" Because he wanted to know if it was real. Nice. And it was real. The greatest diamond heist in history was foiled by a half-eaten sandwich, right? So you can only find that stuff by research. Right. So you research, I was researching there, every famous break-in,
Right.
right? Because I had to break into
Right.
the British Museum.
Right.
How do people do it? Because if you call the British Museum and
They're
say,
not gonna
how do you
tell
break
you.
in? They don't tell you.
I did once
I
contact an airport.
tried that.
I tried calling an airport and asking them what would be the best way to conduct a terrorist attack there, and they hung up on me.
Yeah,
So
luckily for me, I have a SWAT team member lives on my street. So on the stuff that I can't look up on the internet, I just go knock on the door. I go, Mike, do you know how to make a bomb? And they go, oh yeah. And they're like, okay, let's talk about that because I don't want to search how do you make a bomb.
Right.
But,
I think there's a big file on me somewhere.
Yes, there has to be on all of us.
Yeah.
But I try to find the experts.
Yeah.
So for this book, it's Egypt, and I looked at the National Geographic documentaries about Egypt, and I thought, who do they interview that interests me the most? And I wrote her, and she wrote back, and so the leading Egyptologist in the country, and we talk, and I Zoom it so I can record it, and take notes. And what's great is, what I've learned. The first question I ask an expert is, what do we get wrong? Right. What are the things that you hate in movies or books about Egypt? I had another one where this librarian wrote me, and it was wonderful. She was great. She says, I'm a middle school librarian. I love your books. We use them, and my kids love the books. And then this throwaway sentence at the end of the email is, oh, my husband used to run the CIA. So if you want spy help, he'll do it. And I wrote to him, and I said, my wife's a teacher, and she volunteers me all the time for stuff I know nothing about. So you probably don't know that she has volunteered you to help me write my middle grade spy novel.
Right.
But if you'll help, I will take it. And he was right back. Absolutely.
People love to talk about what they do.
And they love to set the record straight. Yes. I asked him, I go, what do we get wrong in spy? And he goes, there's 4 things. Like he was waiting for someone to ask him why James Bond movies are not right, or why Jason Bourne movies are not right. So that those 2 were great. Kara Cooney, Mike Morrell. Then Leo Lana is like the world's expert on praying mantises in the Amazon rainforest. And I think I got the impression he was on some satellite phone in the Amazon when I'm talking to him. But I for the environmentalist in my book is a Brazilian teenager whose environmental thrust is protecting the rainforest. I needed someone who knew better than me, and who knew better than just doing some surface research. I needed someone who could tell me, no, this is it. And I could then ask her, okay, who are the real villains?
Right.
And he basically says everyone, right? Everyone on the planet. But anyway,
that's what a CIA director would probably say. But my neighbors, everybody else.
Actually, so in that book, they went to Moscow and he went to Beijing. And so I asked to talk about, security situations in Moscow. And he goes, you have to assume every instant that you're in Moscow that you're being listened to. He goes, they have, all these cops dressed as tourists, they have all this stuff, and it's unbelievable. And I said, oh, so Beijing is bad? He goes, Beijing's 10 times worse. I'm like, wait, you just said it was and he said, Beijing, there's so much AI involved in the surveillance that you can't possibly keep track of it. But that at any time, they follow with, they could say that hat would trigger a thing,
right?
And if there was a picture of you later in the day without the hat, it would flag it as why did he take his hat off? That's right. Terrifying.
Yeah. A good cautionary tale.
I don't know if I was supposed to say that out loud.
Yeah. No, it's not good. Well,
he's retired,
we're not
so
there
I can't
now,
get him fired.
So let's talk a little bit about your background. Let's jump into that. You were born in Italy.
I was born in Italy.
And you spent part of your childhood there. How long were you there, and why did you come to the United States?
So my mom was hippie, bohemian, whatever. So my mom was an artist, and she had 2 kids from previous marriage, and she went to Italy to paint. And 4 years later, she came back with paintings and a baby.
And a baby.
And that's all we know for sure. She was pretty, and my brothers, So no, I spent my first couple of years there. And it's odd because my mom's not Italian. My brothers, their father wasn't Italian. So I'm the only Italian in my family because I don't really have a connection to the Italian family. And that doesn't seem like you should be able to be that. But I really identify as Italian in a lot of ways. And it's a really important part of who I am. But I grew up in a small town in Florida. And so I guess peninsulas are the thing for me. I always, whether it was Italy or whether it was Florida, I was always in the peninsula.
Right. Some people have a type.
Yeah.
So how does that influence you and writing about international?
Well, it's the internet. both of those, there's the two parts of that. One is the international. The other part is kids growing up who had different fathers,
Right.
but whose fathers weren't part of their lives, and the idea of a found family, an idea of what a family really is.
Right.
And it's not that it is, and that's what the City Spies are. They're kids from all over with different fathers and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And, you know, the first book series I wrote was very much about New York City. The next one, I used Washington to speak more, but I wanted to reach more problems in a bigger thing. And what's really been a nice byproduct of that is City Spies is translated in 12 different languages.
That's awesome.
You know, so it's like, because it's a more international story, more countries are like, oh, we want that
We're
too.
interested. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and so then you got to be careful not to say anything bad about the country. You know, you're like, so I doubt China's going to pick it up.
Maybe not.
But yeah.
Maybe not. Yeah. So you talk about when you were a kid that you weren't much of a reader. I wasn't either. And this is, I think, a really interesting part of our backgrounds, that you got most of your stories from TV and movies, and that's where I got mine too. I read books. We talked about favorite books.
Yeah.
But I did read books, but I didn't have my nose buried in a book all the time.
I didn't read it all. I hardly
read
read
a
it all.
ton now,
Yeah.
but I didn't read much then when I was a kid. So you were inspired by TV. You were inspired by film. You eventually went to University of Southern California and studied screenwriting, right?
Right.
So how did that shape you? Why did you turn to novels, and how does that influence the novel?
Well, you know, I was a super slow reader, and that frustrated me.
Same.
But movies were great because they were the same length for everyone. There's like an hour and a half to 2 hours, right? There's no, and so at the end, when everyone's talking in class, when everyone talked, they were talking about the parts that I hadn't got to yet. So why finish, right? And now at the movie, we can all talk about it. And the movie I could keep up. You know, so I fell in love with movies. I had a middle school teacher who had us make movies in class.
Oh, cool.
And I wrote the movie every time. And I said, I think maybe, because I knew I wanted to be a writer, I just didn't know what I could write. I mean, if you can't read a book well, you probably can't write a book well.
Doesn't inspire you.
Yeah, and I said, I think I want to write scripts or plays. And this teacher's amazing. He said, write a play, we'll produce it. Are you going to check
awesome.
with my mom or the principal? And so I wrote a play and we produced it. And I thought, scripts and dialogues and jokes. So yeah, I went to film school. Now you started in TV too, right?
Yeah, I did some work in TV while I was also trying to write novels, but I did write episodes of City Confidential for a company called Jupiter Entertainment, which we figured out. You started out there too.
Yeah, but there is a group of middle grade fiction authors. So Stuart Gibbs, Gordon Corman, Max Brallier. Then you get into Shannon Messenger, Victoria Aveyard, Suzanne Collins. We all started scriptwriters.
Right.
Even Gordon Corman, who was published in high school.
15?
He was published in high school at 15. When he got to NYU, he majored in film until he realized he didn't like it and then switched. But it's like, I think middle grade fiction is, and Shannon Messenger and I majored in the same thing at the same school, like decades apart. And this crowd is much more excited about Shannon than me, than they are about me. But she's awesome.
Name drop as much as you want.
But you know what was great about that is, you know, we write stuff that moves at a fast pace. It's a lot of dialogue because you learn to write dialogue. There's less description because you don't feel. So for me, it was an actual, but the flow was an odd jump, and it was because I did a show at Nickelodeon called The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo, and it was popular enough. This is where the parents recognize.
Right.
That's
somebody out there is like, oh my gosh.
When you're old, is when you go to schools and then the teachers are the ones.
They're like, I remember that show.
And it was popular enough that they had tie-in books.
Nice.
And so the two writers on the show got to each write one, and the other writer was Suzanne Collins, actually. And we both liked it, and both of us ended up
going that direction.
Suzanne really went hard. She did great. But so
why couldn't you have done as well as she did?
Because I'm not nearly as talented as she is.
I'm just kidding.
No, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with my mediocrity. It's all good.
So you're very successful at your mediocrity. So you, as a teenager, worked at Disney because you're in Florida. You've said that, like, if you live in Florida, you pretty much
Disney dominates the state. Yes, yes.
So you worked there on a ride
that you wrote as a kid.
That I think I wrote as a kid. I don't know if I had you as the person, as the host on the ride, but it was Davy Crockett's canoe.
Davy Crockett Explorer Canoes.
Explorer Canoes.
Davy
Explorer
Crockett.
Canoes. Okay, and your job was what? Explain your job
Okay.
on the canoe.
So I worked every summer of college. I worked at Disney World on the Davy, Crockett Explorer canoes. And I thought I was getting hired to work in the Jungle Cruise. This is the story of my life. Jungle Cruise was the cool job. And you got
It's
the
a big
safari
paddle wheel,
hat,
right?
the Jungle Cruise is motorized.
Yeah, right.
Back then they had a fake gun. They shoot the hippo. They got rid of that for other events.
Oh,
And I get there, and then when it comes to assignment day, they said, no, you're on the canoe ride, which was way better in retrospect because the Jungle Cruise guys had to do a script.
that was already written for
It was written for them.
Right.
Ours, we got to do our own stuff. And I learned about comedy writing those 3 summers because I had the same setting.
You had to,
but I could change the jokes based on what I saw the audience. And by the time I was done, and I could learn, it's like, okay, so here's this joke, so I'll give an example. It's terrible jokes. They're like dad jokes, but we weren't dads at the time. They knew we would become dads. Like there's a cabin on fire on the back of the burning cabin, and the joke was always, oh, over here on your left hand side you'll see a burning cabin. It's not just any cabin. That's where my girlfriend lives. Well, technically she's my old flame, right? Because it's on fire, right? So it's a really bad joke. Well, okay, I was willing to do that. But then I thought, no, I'm going to push this a little bit here. So I go, hey, my girlfriend, yeah, she's my old flame. She used to work here, but she got fired.
nice.
Right? And then I was at, it's a shame that we broke up because she's really hot. And you could twist it. Now, I don't work for this anymore, so I guess I can say this. I was in an accident where my boat got hit by a keelboat and dumped out, and we had to wash ashore. And we washed ashore at the burning cabin. And it's this horrible thing. There's like mouse ears and cameras and shit just floating in the rivers of America. And I know Tom Sawyer's Island is filled with rattlesnakes. And so I'm like, just stay here. I'm assuming someone will come rescue us. And so we're sitting there, and it's just trauma. But we're at the burning cabin. I said, well, while we're here, let me tell you about my girlfriend. And I told the joke. No one laughed. It's like the worst reaction to a joke I've ever gotten in my life. And it's just like, they just had a very traumatic event.
So that taught you about timing.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything.
So what it taught me most important was phrasing of jokes was important, but that when you'd see the people get on, I would change the routine based on who it is.
Right.
Writing to an audience. Right. And learning that the key to writing is not me, but it's who's going to read it,
right,
or who's going to hear it,
right,
and writing to that. And that really helped me when I started writing for Mickey Mouse Club at Disney Channel, and because now I am writing
sketch comedy
for kids,
right?
Not for that I find funny. Okay,
for kids specifically, like kids like Justin Timberlake, Ryan Gosling, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Carrie Russell were some of the kids
that work every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? That's pretty incredible.
And I should have been nicer to them.
Yeah.
I should have been nicer to them.
How is Christina Aguilera, and have you talked to her lately?
I haven't talked to her lately. I got to tell you, those kids you mentioned in particular were all great.
Yeah.
Christina was awesome.
Yeah.
She was a sweet kid. As it happened, my office was the closest to their tutoring in school.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a couch. And so they would come to just plop on the couch, play Nerf football, and I would yell at, and not just them, all of them, like, come on, we're trying to write the sketches.
I got work to do here.
And I should have just been nicer and said, sure, Justin, I'll play Nerf basketball with you. We can become best friends.
Please remember me when you're famous. So do you remember?
This whole thing is about everyone who I worked with who became way more
successful than you. That's the theme of this.
You're one of them.
I'm one of them. You're one of them. Do you remember any of the sketches that you wrote?
I remember most of the sketches.
What are some of the best or funniest things that made those future stars say?
I will tell you my favorite sketch story.
All
right. So I wrote a sketch called Terminator Florist. Terminator 2 had just come out, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if the next Terminator was a florist? Right. That was the ultimate cyber florist, and it was just it was the commercial for the movie, the trailer, and it's like coming to the theater. It started with Sarah Connor on her couch.
Yeah.
And then there's a pounding on the door, and then the Terminator, because one of the kids did a great Terminator impression,
nice
Arnold impression, and he busts the door, and he goes, Sarah Jane Connor, and she screams, she's like, ah! And then she goes, somebody loves you, and he holds up the flowers, right? And he goes, no, the T3 Terminator florist. And it's like, you forget your mom's birthday? It's okay. I traveled through time. Your girlfriend will open the door. It's okay. And he punches through the door and says, Tommy says he's sorry, right? So we have, it wrote itself. I wrote it, and then we pitched it. Killed in the room.
Yeah.
Then you pitch it to the next level. Killed in the room. So I'm like, great. This is going to be on the air. And then Disney Channel says no. And I'm like, how's that possible?
Why?
They said because kids don't know what a florist is. And my response was, in every scene, he's working with flowers. He has a flower shop. He runs a credit card through his mouth. I mean, all the stuff we have in it. How do they not know? Kids don't know what a florist is. This ate at my soul. Not my sense of right and wrong is, other than with regard to my family and literature, is most upset about comedy. When comedy is not respected. Right. And it's like, that's funny. It should be treated better. And one day I was in a really bad mood, and I walked in the head writer's office, and I said, and now I'm admitting another thing here. I said, I just got off the phone with the National Floral Board, and they said, the what? I said, the National Floral Board. It's the lobbying unit of the floral industry. And they go, yeah. And they go, 40% of all flowers are bought by someone 19 or under. They go, you've got to be kidding. I said, no, 40% of all flowers are bought by someone 19 or under. It said, write the sketch. And it went on, and it killed, and the kids in the audience loved it. And at the end of it, I said, don't tell me you guys believe that was true. They go, wait, that's not true. I'm like, it doesn't matter. If kids know what a florist is, it's funny. So, wow. Barry, Tom, it was a lie.
Who do you remember who the person who was the kid who did such a great Arnold accent? Do you remember?
His name is Mark, and I'm just blanking his last name.
Right. I'm putting you on the spot now for a while.
But he's famous for a commercial. He's in a great commercial. There is a Levi's commercial, I think it was 501, that Spike Jonze directed, and it's about a kid who's been in an injury, and the heart monitor starts playing Tainted Love by Soft Cell. And the whole crowd starts singing it. And then with the tush pedals hit right at the whoa, Tainted Love. And that was Mark. He's great. He's in commercials and voiceover artist now.
Nice. Now, writing television is often a team sport.
Yes.
Right? You're in a writer's room. You're bouncing
things.
I
love that.
People. So do you miss that with novel writing?
No, I don't miss it. I got to do it.
What's different?
I got to do it because of that. Right. Because you're in a room and it's funny, and then someone says, "But kids don't know what a florist is," and that eventually calcifies, and you're just like, I can't take it anymore.
Right.
Right or wrong, good or bad, I know what's in these books is mine. Now my editor will help.
Sure.
And you have a fantastic editor who I love, and I have a fantastic editor who I love. But I like that part. I got to do the other, and there are fewer things that I enjoy more than being in a room with like 6 funny people. Yeah. And the challenge is make me laugh. Right. And you're there till 3 a.m. making each other laugh.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that you did do now still, I don't know, as a producer, is a location scout. Do you still do this work?
No, I
used to.
I only do books
now. You only do books now.
Okay. But I did travel shows. I did for History Channel, I did a travel show. And for the Golf Channel, I did a travel show. And I did a lot of documentaries, different lengths, sports documentaries and stuff. And when you scout locations, and
so explain that to people who don't know what that means.
So in like big time television movies, there are people who just do that. But when you're in cable television, often the producer's responsible for that. So like if we were going to come and do an interview at Malaprops with local legendary author, #1 New York Times bestseller, Alan Gratz, I would come here before the cruise, like a week earlier. I know I couldn't. You couldn't get me. I said it was dream big. And I would look around and find a setting that looked the best. Oh, we'll do it here and that. We'll have the books in the background. We'll have a table with the books over here. And that's one thing in an interview. And another thing, if I did a documentary, talked about the March on Washington. I interviewed John Lewis, like that. So it's like, we want to go shoot the Lincoln Memorial, and we want to capture this, and we want to find. So you go and you look for how to get the most out of the location. So I just do that with the books too.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
so that's the next question is, so how do you pull that into, like, when you're scouting, you did this a little bit on your European trip, you were standing there, you were looking at the Eiffel Tower. Like, how do you visualize scenes when you're on location, or how do you do this research now for the books?
So the travel part of the research is, and that the one difference was that trip inspired it.
Right.
Boy, I wish I knew I was going to write a book set there then, because I would have gone and looked for some specific things.
Yeah, I've done that.
But it's like, okay, there's a scene in the first City Spies book takes place at the Edinburgh train station. I went there and I said, okay, what platform will they get to? How does that look? Right. What do you see from there? What do you see up above? oh, there's the place where the kid that likes to eat would want to eat. Take pictures of that, get the menu, get the,
Right.
So I want to look at the place that's the most interesting so that I can take pictures of it. And I fill my computer with them so that when I'm writing that scene, first of all, it helps me with logistics, blocking, we call it in television, but it also helps me remember, oh, that place smelled great.
Right.
So you can smell
Right.
those pies cooking at that pie shop. So yeah, I want to put that in there. So I try to do that. And then my wife tries to get me to do things like, why don't you start the next book in Venice? So we can go to Venice.
Exactly. Yes.
So we just walked through Venice and I walked every step that the characters walk. So I would make sure I would get it right.
Yeah, I plan to write a book about Iceland and New Zealand, maybe Hawaii. I'm writing a book about Hawaii right now. So we're getting close to audience question time. We're gonna. I got a couple more, but
I'll answer quickly this time.
Be prepared. Be prepared is all I'm saying. So you live in Orlando now.
I do.
Okay.
I have since high school.
Okay.
Since when I graduated high school, my mom moved to Orlando the next day.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up working there during the summer. And then I went to college in California, but my wife and I ended up settling in Florida.
Okay. So you have agents named for cities: Brooklyn, Kathmandu, Sydney, Paris, Rio. You're from Orlando, or you live there now. If you had a kid named Orlando in City Spies, what would they be like and what would their talents be? You haven't had that question.
I haven't. I asked myself because when I started, I made a list of 100 world cities that I thought would be good character names.
Like Asheville.
Because what you couldn't do is you couldn't have a kid named Winston-Salem, right? Like you could say, hey, Winston-Salem.
They could be twins, Winston and Salem.
Well, yes.
Come on, it's right there.
Because there's not enough characters.
Minneapolis and St. Paul, twins.
So a kid named Orlando would be good at a boy band. That would be his talent. That's the one thing. We've actually produced, and I don't think I belong in this category, but Orlando has produced amazing authors. Katie Camillo, John Green are both right from there in town, so I think they would be whatever was themed. They would be good at themes. You're right. I have not gotten this question before. Orlando was one of the possible U.S. names. The U.S. names that were in the running were Brooklyn, Orlando, Savannah, Charlotte, Dallas, Austin.
Right.
But Brooklyn,
those are all good names. Brooklyn's great.
For what I needed.
Were there any other world city names that almost made the list that were really close that you were?
Well, Sydney was I wanted one from each continent.
Sydney's a great.
Sydney was the slam dunk,
right?
And I always knew from the beginning that it would be a female character,
right?
Cat from Kathmandu. I would say that the Asian one was harder to find names that translated directly, but I really love the idea of one of them not being from like Paris, the giant city. Right. Kathmandu's a little smaller, and the Himalayas give her a different personality. Because really, the personalities came from the names.
Right.
That was
right. And that's why I was looking at Orlando.
I'd have to think of that one.
Really, for a while. Great performer, really out there.
Are you indicating that
we're almost there? I know. Yeah. So real quickly, without too many spoilers, can you tell us a favorite scene or set piece in this book, City of the Dead, that you can't wait for people to read? Do you think they're going to get a kick out?
In City of the Dead, I think yes. There is. I have without spoilers.
I know this is the trick.
I wanted two simultaneous things going on, like out of control, like two things going out of control, and it happens in Washington D.C. So one it actually splits in the chapter. They don't even give you the Botanic Gardens and the other in the Brazilian Embassy. But the great thing, and I don't want to spoil too much, across the street from the Brazilian Embassy. The most amazing thing in Washington, D.C. is across the street from the Brazilian Embassy, and that's the Iranian Embassy. And it's amazing because it's been empty since 1979 and the windows are boarded up because it's owned by Iran, but they can't come here because we have no diplomatic relations to them. And the thought that in a story about espionage and all like that I have a haunted house in the middle of the most expensive real estate in Washington was just
too good to pass up.
That is literally in the next book. That's not in this book.
Well, that's all right. That's to come.
Because I just wrote that book.
I thought as you were answering that sounded like the next book from the characters that you're talking or the story you're talking about. But listen, that you got to understand any of that. You have to read City of the Dead, which is book 4, before you read.
They can edit. They can edit.
I'm always thinking about the next one.
There's I can't believe I did that. There's a scene in there. Okay, I love independent bookstores. A couple summers ago, my wife and I drove to 14 different independent bookstores in North Carolina. We were actually on our way to Malaprop. This is not an exaggeration. We were on our way to Malaprops on the interstate, and I told my wife, I said, I just wanted to run this by you because this is the big moment in City Spies 4. And I told her the scene, and she screamed.
You had to pull the car over.
No, I was driving. I wouldn't have told her if she was driving. And she screamed, and I thought, it is as good as I think it is. And that's in the middle of this book. And I'm not going to tell you.
All right, well, that's a great teaser.
And that's a great teaser book. And then when I told my editor did editor's version. They don't scream because they don't want to ever act too excited. She seemed pretty excited. I said, this is what I'm going to do in the middle of this one. And it's been,
and she said,
3 books building to it. It's taken 3 books, 1,000 pages to build to the moment to get that reaction. Okay.
All right, let's do some questions.
Let's questions.
All right.
I can't believe I got the wrong book.
That can be heard into the mic. So
Some kid
we're
would be
taking
reading for.
questions from our virtual audience, and Aya will read some of those. But let's start with a question from the live audience. Have a question?
Anybody out there got a question for us? Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Okay, question from the back.
Thank you for being here. What makes children's book a children's book?
So the question is, what makes a children's book a children's book?
Well, the obvious answer is it has to have a main character of the age. And in a practical way, that's how often, what's the difference between a YA book and a middle grade book? In its definition, it's going to be the age of the main character, but in its practicality, there's a lot more dimension to it than that, the content like that. To me, that's the part of it, but what makes it essential to me is when you write a children's book, you are being entrusted with the future of the reader. So a children's book should be written as something that makes you fall in love with books, that takes into consideration the fact that this is a spy novel, and there are certain things that we know in spy movies and spy books and mysteries that are to be accepted. But we have to remind ourselves, our reader may not know that. Our reader may not know that what happens in the first. So I always feel like it's like this privilege that I get to be part of introducing young readers to this. And the goal is, sure, I want them to like the books that I write because they're spending their time, my money. But the goal is really, I just want them to read. And whether they never read another book of mine at all, that's fine. But that's what makes it is you're doing more than, it's not just these however many 100 pages, it's you're part of the future. You're part of, in the same way that a youth coach is really trying to inspire a love of,
Not really win the game. I mean, they want to win the game,
but it's
that's not
about
the real.
you want to get it. So that's it. It's about thinking about it that way as opposed to just thinking about it from the way of what's in this book.
Okay, let's take one from the virtual audience.
Sure. Okay, so this one's a two-parter.
Two-parter, one
It
for you, one for me.
says, how do you decide how long each chapter is? And also, how do you write unique dialogue for each character that sounds natural?
So how do you decide how long each chapter is?
Okay.
And then how do you create unique dialogue so that it,
How do you decide on length of chapter?
so this is something that has evolved for me over time.
Yeah.
I started naturally sort of falling into about a 7-page chapter. I wouldn't plan that. I would just say, this is what I want to have happen in the chapter, in this chapter, in this chapter. And I kind of started to realize I had about an average of 7 pages per chapter. It was totally accident. I wasn't planning it. And then I started to really think about my audience, as you talked about earlier. And I started to think about young readers who really, or people who struggle to read, as you and I did when we were kids,
Yeah.
who
I think about that a lot.
clock how far they've gotten by how many chapters they finished, right? Like I finished a chapter and that's a big deal. And so I started making my chapters shorter, and I tried to start making them more cliffhangery to draw the reader forward. And
I
that's what
definitely do that.
which is done in a lot of adult thrillers as well.
Right. So for me, that television and screenplay writing is very dictated by page length. Like you're to be within, I remember on the Shelby scripts for Nickelodeon, they were all supposed to be 31 pages long. And that if you were anything other than 29 to 33, it was a problem, right? And so we got in the habit of building scenes by a certain length. That was maybe certain number of pages in the script, but that in a In a book, it's the content of information that feels like that.
Right.
And the same like it worked out to about 7 or 8 pages, but for me, 2,000 words was the never intentional, but I constantly noticed that chapters range between 1,800 and 2,200 words. I didn't mind jump around a lot because there's so many, and his jump around in a different way because he has a lot of cross stories. But
but if you do it too short, you don't have enough time.
There's not enough.
I guess
so I noticed that my chapters are longer the first half, and they shorten as it goes along because the pace picks up, and the first half of the book you're introducing so much, and there's hopefully it's like the dominoes set up, and then it's like click, and then you
can
start
go
falling.
fast and furious.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
so,
I think that builds confidence in, again with the cliffhangers, I think that builds confidence in the reader. It's like, oh wait, I got through that chapter quick. Oh, I got, and it's like I'm picking it up and I'm going with it.
So about the second question about dialogue, how do you make sure that the dialogue is unique for each of your characters?
That's the advantage of having worked in television for so long. Is the first rule. Now I've done both television where I'm writing like fictional narratives, like a TV series or a sketch comedy series, and I've done television script writing where you're writing for the voice of the documentary. And the thing that you learn how to do is, I'm writing, if Alan's the narrator, I need to write the way that Alan talks, not have him talk the way that I write. And so it's just something you get used to. But I think that's why so many script writers have gone into this, because dialogue is a very comfortable thing for us. But it is important that you do make them sound different. The thing that really haunted me is the first time I listened to one of these books on tape, and it never dawned on me that they all had different accents. And that for me, I didn't have to write those, but that poor woman has to change 7 different accents on one page. I wrote her an apology letter. I absolutely did.
When I wrote for City Confidential, Paul Winfield
was
the original narrator, and then Keith David.
We had to change it, right?
Well, a little bit, because they have different intonation in their voices and that sort of thing. And if you're a young writer out there, one of the great ways you can practice this is exactly what you're saying. When you were writing for TV, you knew who your actors were. Write fan fiction, write for TV shows and things where you can hear the voice of those characters.
And it trains you in developing
and
the
you
skills.
learn how to write lines that would work for them. Right.
Do you have another online question?
I'm gonna go to
Let's do it.
Go ahead.
Out of like the main characters in the book, who's your favorite, and like what attributes do you
Talking about City Spies?
Yeah.
So in City Spies, who's your favorite character, and what's your favorite thing about it? Why do you like it?
So maybe the first rule of writing, you can't have a favorite character. Now I'm going to give you answers, but by that I mean, if I truly had a favorite character, the books would become unbalanced. Because, I don't want Sydney to have something bad happen, or I love Sydney. I want Sydney to solve it, right? So you have to force yourself, like with kids, you always want to make sure you're letting all your kids. But what you want to do with your kids is you want to let your kids excel at the things they excel at. So the character I'm most like is Mother. The character who of the kids I'm most like is Paris, although he's smarter and stronger than me. I like to write Kat the most. Who's your favorite character? Sydney. No.
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn's your favorite character. And why is Brooklyn your favorite character? Anna.
I think she's my favorite character because I remember, like, in her book, she spoke out to me because she kind of rebelled.
Right.
And I liked that. And she knew what she thought was right, and then she stuck up for it, and then she did what she could to make it right. And I like that about her.
So here's not the trick, but here was the key in the development of that. And I love that answer. So I had the cities, and that kind of led me a little bit to the traits. But then what I did is I gave each of them one of my major child problems from middle school. So my sense of feeling, because I was the youngest kid in my family, that I got overlooked and that no one took me seriously, I gave that to Rio. My fear always that I would disappoint anyone, I gave that to Paris. My lack of understanding why everyone else understood everything socially and I didn't, I gave that to Kat. So all 5 of them are like, get me in the heart problems. And I wanted that to be, so I didn't favor them. So, you pick one, and so build them that way. I love that you like her for those reasons. And one of the most pleasant surprises of writing the series, and the reason I'm glad we switched main characters, I assume, because Brooklyn was the main character, the first thing, that if I go to schools, which I do all the time, and say, who's your favorite character? Most of the kids would say Brooklyn. I thought it would be 50% Brooklyn, and then the other 4 kids, without a doubt, it's always 1/5, 1/5 there. It's equal. It's never
They all have
not
their own
been equal,
fans.
which makes me then realize that I have to make sure that even if one's the main character, every character has a full and complete story that's resolved. That's why the books have gotten longer, because it's like Rio has to have his moment, because there's someone who has waited a year because they love Rio, and it's like,
Where's my Rio scene?
Yeah, where's my Rio moment, right? I don't mean to over dramatic, but it's like, I'm that way with certain TV shows. I wait a year. I can't wait for the show to come. It's like, oh, they didn't do my favorite thing. So yeah.
Last question.
Last
from the
question.
virtual audience.
So I know earlier you talked about one of your favorite scenes to write in this book, but what was the most challenging?
Most challenging scene to write in this book.
In this particular one, and actually, I'll do it on
Try
this
and do
one.
this book and
I'll
not
try
the
to do
next.
this book. I spend a quarter of the time writing the book, writing the first chapter, trying to get everything started. So that's always the hardest, because I want it to start exciting. This one starts with the break-in right? This is British Museum. Yeah, starts with the break-in at the British Museum. So I had to figure out how you break in, and how do you realistically believe that you would break in? And that was a ton of research. And also, I know that, okay, most of the people that read this have read at least one of the other books, but some haven't. So I have to explain the history of every character in the series in that first and second chapter without boring the people who already know that information.
Right.
So you spend a lot of time trying
Exposition.
to figure out how to wheel that into conversation. And then you wait to find where things line up. So that first chapter, okay, I knew I wanted to write about ancient Egypt, and I knew I wanted to have a heist. So I'm going to start with the heist. Well, the British Museum has a lot of ancient Egypt stuff in it. So, okay, I'll do that. So when would you break into the British Museum? Well, I looked up all these heists and how they happened and how they got caught, and what mistakes they made. And I came up with Bonfire Night. Bonfire Night is this night in the UK where they celebrate the Guy Fawkes was going to try to blow up Parliament in 1605, and they stopped him. And so they burn stuff. They have bonfires. They have fireworks. It's the loudest day of the year. So that's the perfect time to break into the museum. Okay, so November 5th. So now I know but this is taking weeks to get to this, November 5th. And then Guy Fawkes is also the symbol of anarchy on the web. So that leads me to, okay, so I have to figure out how to get hacking into this. And then, but it's about Egypt. And then I find out that King Tut was discovered on November 4th.
Dun, dun, dun.
So midnight on November 4th is the transition from King Tut Day to Guy Fawkes Day. And now I'm beginning to see this is now coming together. And so all those elements, I now have the ingredients to cook the meal. So that takes a long time. And my wife comes home from her job as a school teacher. She goes, how many pages did you get written today? And I go, I don't really want questions like that for a while.
That's not a constructive question.
It's not. Like, she meant it positively. But yeah, so that was the most challenging. Yeah, for sure.
Well, live audience.
Any last questions?
Last questions? Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that maybe people who have read it have read all of them in order and are waiting for this fourth one, but somebody may have just read one. So you feel like they could be standalone, or do they need to be read?
Can you pick them up?
I think you can read them in any order you want. I think you can start it. I think a better way to say it is you can start whenever you want. There are surprises in the first books that are ruined if you read the third book. The first book, hopefully, is still really good. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully, but there's a big reveal in that book that you already know. Right. So you would just, and it wouldn't strike you as a problem. You just wouldn't realize that, like when we watch Psycho, we don't realize that in 1960, when she went to the shower, no one had any idea something was going to happen. But we go, oh my God, she's about to get killed, right? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, of course, we found that out. So, but I feel like I owe it to people, to any reader, to not say, oh, you have to read another 3 books before you can read this one, right? my favorite adult author is Michael Connelly. And I didn't start at the beginning of the Michael Connelly, the Harry Bosch books. And I got hooked and I went back. And I thought, oh, I know that, but it's still good. But yeah, so you can start with any of them. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So good. So you could start with City of the Dead, which is now on sale. And you can get it from Malaprop's bookstore, right? Is there a link in on the online stuff?
It's probably next to us or beneath
somewhere
us
over
or-
here. And then the people out here can actually buy one and bring it up here and get it signed. And they will have signed copies left here at the store that they can order. Is that right?
And purchase right now.
And purchase right now. Listen to that. What a deal.
And any educators out there, Simon & Schuster and I have collaborated on we're a couple days from it going live, but there's a single link. You can, if you follow me on any social media, I'll post about it. And it will give you anything you need for your class if your kids are doing it. There's videos, there's interviews, there's travel logs that I've made of each of the cities from the books. There's activity sheets. There's it's all free. Just print it and go, and everything you could possibly need in your classroom.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
lots
We
of fun.
thank you very much.
Thank
James, for
you.
being here in conversation with Alan.
And Alan, thank you
Have
so
a
much.
good
Thanks,
evening.
James.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys for being here.